Hey, this is Ty from Aquira. Today, I'd like to share a story with you from one of our acquisition entrepreneurs, Noah, whose journey through the acquisition process was notably smooth and successful. What set Noah's experience apart wasn't just the speed of the process, although that was quicker than usual. One of the real highlights was his excellent relationship with the seller, and that's something we don't always see. This positive dynamic and efficient process, even if it didn't feel that way to Noah, really exemplifies an ideal acquisition scenario. Noah and I talked about his acquisition process, his experience with Acquira and our Accelerator program, and I'd like to bring you our conversation. So, congratulations, first of all.
Thank you.
Yeah, I heard a lot from Doug that this was sort of the ideal business buying process that you went through.
That's what they tell me. I know it didn't feel like that on my end at times, but yeah, a seller was really easy to work with. And overall, I know I'm very lucky. So I'm happy to be here.
What is the business that you ended up buying?
It's an electrical contractor.
And how much was it?
Purchase price was
Yeah.
so it was 3 million with like closing costs and lines of credit and everything, right? Like working capital was the word I was looking for. Um, Probably closer to like between 3.25 and 3.5, depending on what you count.
Right. And how did you find the whole process of, going through the negotiations and dealing with the seller and everything?
Really easy. It was a well-priced business, so they had an asking price that was a little bit lower than that, but they were not including any inventory or working capital. So um, I just offered the ask and not a ton of negotiating needed, just because I knew what the business was worth to me was, at or above that price. So I just figured no use messing around. I tried, on a couple other businesses to, you know, buy it a little bit lower of a valuation, and lost out on a couple bids to the point where I figured just quality business. If the price is already good, just offer the seller what he wants, and that's really from there. All of the other issues that we had were really easy to work through because the seller knew that I was negotiating in good faith. So there are some concessions that they made, and the way that we're splitting some of the like working capital and AR up and stuff is is more or less favorable to me. So I got sort of favorable terms on the stuff that I care about, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. And you mentioned that dealing with the seller was pretty good. Doug said that the seller had sort of an interesting story of why he was selling his business.
Yeah. So he had actually was interested in selling potentially like on and off for a couple years for his retiring, but his mom passed away last year, and sort of her it's very dramatic, but her sort of dying wish was that he get to go on and like live his life, because I know he had found another seller a couple years ago, and then one of the key employees got really sick, and he just decided it wasn't the right time and pulled out. So, yeah, that was definitely something that he was very intent on. But at the same time, he's definitely a workaholic, and he definitely loves the electrical contracting space. So every time we talk about like the way he's transitioning out, we have timelines of month and a half he's full time, month and a half time, and then for the rest of the year he's consulting. But every time we talk about paring down, he's always like, "Oh well, I'm not going anywhere. If you want help doing some bids, or need an extra pair of hands, just give me a call." And you have to tell him, you know, I want you to be able to retire and enjoy the rest of your life. But
Yeah.
yeah.
What's in the contract as far as like how long he's gonna stick around for?
So it's a year, because that's the SBA limit
Mm.
on how long a seller can be around. So we have the right to use his license until, I guess, end of January of 2025. So he's going to be full time till mid March, and then coming in either every other day or every other week, depending on where we're at with some of our additional hiring, right? Just what makes sense there until May. And then that's when we're going to start doing, like leadership team assembly and workshops and stuff. And then he'll be sort of on a consulting basis, so 10 to 20 hours a week, depending on if we have a bunch of jobs coming in and we need him to help bid, or, he needs to help continue mentoring, my project manager, that sort of thing.
Very cool. And I guess let's take it back to the beginning. How did you first hear about Aquira? Do you remember?
That is a great question. So the first time I heard about Acquira was actually through Google search. So I had, but that wasn't that wasn't when I joined. So I had the idea of buying a small business just because I had done, a couple of other types of investments, and I've always been interested in doing stuff that's a little bit more entrepreneurial. And I realized, from an investing perspective, what better way to get better returns than, being active and actually taking part in a business. And that way I could also transition my career over to something that would be more valuable. But I was concerned about essentially financing. I didn't know about the SBA. I didn't know how much money I'd need. And I found Acquira, and I read one of the articles about, how you can get an SBA loan for essentially 90% of the purchase price. And then that they also have the equity fund that can help, fund the purchase. So theoretically, you only need a small percentage down. And I just thought, this has to be a scam. So I immediately clicked away. And then a couple weeks later, I got an Instagram ad for it. And then I was like, oh, I thought I've seen this before. And then I looked into it a little more. And it's very much not a scam. So I'm very grateful for that.
And how did you find, what was the process working with Aquira, like going through the training and the investment committee and all that stuff?
It was fantastic. Yeah. So I signed on in April of last year. So it's been about 10 months, give or take. And yeah, pretty much immediately it was something that, to start off, I was thinking, oh, I just do it an hour or maybe hour and a half a day outside of work, while I was still at my day job. And immediately it took maybe a week or two for me to just fall in love with the idea of entrepreneurship through acquisition, and especially with a self-funded search where, you get to control your destiny. And the Acquira Accelerator was super helpful in terms of giving me a baseline of how to think about buying small businesses, the home services space, as well, and just figuring out how to go about the search. Positioning yourself with brokers was a big one, because especially as someone who's a little bit more capital constrained coming in, right? That's something that took a little bit of time to be able to get in the door with some of these brokers. So it was really invaluable, as was the coaching. And then, yeah, the investment committee was great, because sort of the first one was very nerve-wracking, and it's a lot of prep work on a deal. And then by the time I had done the investment committee for this one, I think it was the third or fourth. I had the last two were within a couple of days of each other. And it was a breeze, because it really shaped my analysis, and my decision making calculus was based off of the work that goes into getting an investment committee presentation ready. So I basically would do all of that, and then I'd have, for the most part, just a really good view of the business that I'm looking at. And obviously there's some stuff that comes up during diligence, but really, really my fundamental understanding of this business, what it is, why it's a good fit for my investment thesis was, for the most part, that analysis hasn't really changed. So that's really the key, I think, is the investment committee process.
That's great to hear. Yeah, and that's what we're trying to explain to AEs all the time, is just how important the investment committee is. So that's good to hear.
Absolutely.
So you went through the process, you did all the training, you went to the IC, you found a business, then you went to the IC. What happened after the IC gave the thumbs up?
Yeah, so I worked pretty much immediately on a sort of a pre-LOI offer, or some people call it, I know, indication of interest, or IOI. So I made one of those letters just detailing, this is the purchase price, this is the working capital, these are the terms that I'm going to be using an SBA loan that it's going to be contingent on. Is that of interest? And then took a couple of days, I think, for the seller to consider that. And then they came back, had some questions, negotiated, not really on purchase price because I was offering exactly what they were asking, but on some of the other terms, they negotiated down a little bit. And then yeah, and then we came up with an LOI pretty much within the week after. So the IOI probably took about 2 days, and then probably 3 or 4 days after that, we had signed an LOI that was pretty well fleshed out. I know Aquira provides a pretty good template that really set the structure for the deal because the diligence process was laid out. I said everything that we were going to be looking for and everything that we need, and it was quite detailed, I guess, relative to some of the other LOI templates that I've seen, that are only a couple pages long. This one I think was like 8 or 9. So it spelled out quite a bit. And yeah, and then the diligence process was pretty smooth. Took more time than I would have liked, but I feel like that's every deal is just, quality of earnings. It's a lot of records that sellers have to give in order for you to understand that the financials really are what they're representing that they are. So that probably took about a month. And then to get the deal through underwriting and get everything that the bank wanted, which was, 1,000,001 different pieces of documentation and every backstory and everything that they could find about my life, probably took another month and a half, 2 months. And then getting from loan commitment to actually closing also probably took another month just because it's a pretty crazy process. And then sort of sometime in that time frame, I moved up from Austin, Texas to St. Louis where the business is. So 4.5 months total, I think, from the day of the IC to closing.
And that move was a pretty big deal.
I had just moved like 4 or 5 months before I found this deal. And doing 2 moves in the course of a year is definitely, it's a lot of logistics, a lot of planning, very much not fun. But I was lucky. I knew that I was going to go all in on the search sort of back in September, which was around when we went under LOI. So I had quit my job already for like a month or two before the move. So I had full time to, do the due diligence process and plan. If I had been working during that time, it certainly things would have taken longer.
And I mean, so we've covered, Acquira, the actual search. What advice would you give to acquisition entrepreneurs that are thinking about becoming acquisition entrepreneurs?
That's a great question. I would say I have several pieces of advice. One is to do your research, make sure it's something that you really want to do because the process is not easy. It's a lot of time, it's a lot of commitment. I know early on, it's easy to get drawn in by the numbers, but looking at a little financial model that says, oh, this is how much money I can make by buying a business that's sort of within the Acquira investment thesis, and then actually doing it and actually being able to produce those results is, even though I had heard the same piece of advice, I did not really think through the enormity of how difficult and how time consuming and how stressful it is. So it's very rewarding, but you got to make sure that you want to do it because yeah, if you're not very self-motivated, then it's not going to be a good fit for you. That's one thing. And then the other one is be lucky. That's the best thing that I've managed to do.
And what's next for you? Like now that you've got the keys and everything, and you're getting dirty, your hands dirty and everything.
Yeah, well, I'm working through the ACE program right now, so there's a bunch more education. I'd probably say I'm 60% of the way through the educational component, and just had my on-site, my integrator came on site this week, and we did the one-on-ones with all the employees. So I have a much better understanding of the culture and what people enjoy and what people want improved. So there's a lot of there's a lot of thinking that I have to do and analyzing and figuring out, what feedback to incorporate and what might not be the best fit. So still sort of putting everything together and making sure that I, maintain the goodwill of the employees and And then in the immediate term, I have a couple hires to make just to help replace everything that the seller did as an electrician that I'm not an electrician, so I can't do. So right now, my immediate focus is hiring, and then sort of medium-term focus is just figuring out how do I serve my employees best so that we can continue on the growth trajectory that we're already on.
That's great. Anything you think we missed?
I don't know. It's been a lot. But yeah, it's really, I mean, the search, when you're searching, it's a lot of ups and downs. It's an emotional roller coaster for sure. And I would just say, while you're going through it, I know it can be scary and frustrating. And there were definitely days where I was questioning whether it would ever happen. But this has been by far, even just with a week or two in or whatever, this has just been the most rewarding thing I've ever done. So I highly recommend it if that's something that people are interested in. And I'm really grateful that, Aquira sort of helped put me on this path, because there's no way that I would have believed that this is possible, without the education and the encouragement and the, gut checks along the way of, having the investment committee, having the, having the coaching and guidance, and the ACE program. It's all necessary, unless, you're buying a business that you've already owned or run before.
Mm-hmm. That's great, man. Well, no, thank you so much for taking the time to talk today.
My pleasure. Yeah, absolutely.
Looking back at Noah's story, it's a reminder of how impactful a good buyer-seller relationship can be in the business acquisition process. His experience was exceptional in its efficiency and the positive rapport he shared with the seller. It's these kinds of relationships that can truly smooth the path to a successful deal, emphasizing that the journey of acquisition is not just about the numbers, but also about the people and partnerships. Thanks so much for your time.